Can a country mobilize 200,000 soldiers and still remain defenseless against a single aircraft carrier? Before we dive into what really happened in the Caribbean, here's a direct question. Subscribe if you believe the United States did the right thing by eliminating the main Russian-Venezuelan intelligence system before a single shot was fired. What you're about to see wasn't an exercise or a simple show of force, but a clash between two visions of warfare. Thousands of troops facing a $13 billion aircraft carrier capable of destroying a strategic target hundreds of kilometers away without being detected. And here comes the controversy. Was it legitimate defense or an action that could have triggered a much larger conflict? Stay, because what happened shifted the balance of power in minutes, and you'll definitely want to give your opinion. At 2 in the afternoon, about 100 nautical miles north of La Guaira, the screens of the Venezuelan High Command revealed an undeniable radar echo. The colossal silhouette of the USS Gerald R, a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered giant. It wasn't passing by, it wasn't casually patrolling. It was stationary, anchored. For Caracas, that was a direct provocation, a message as clear as an unspoken declaration of war. It was literally a $13 billion fist resting at their maritime doorstep. Inside the underground bunker, where the general staff gathered, the atmosphere was a mix of restrained anxiety and forced political defiance. Their immediate reaction was a nationwide mobilization. 200,000 troops deployed in haste. A massive response intended to intimidate, but one that revealed a deep disconnect between 20th century war and 21st century technological conflict. What President Nicolas Maduro was about to learn is that challenging a U.S. nuclear aircraft carrier is not a propaganda maneuver. It is a mistake with irreversible strategic consequences. Officially, everything fell under the so-called Operation North Star, a multinational counter-narcotics campaign aimed at disrupting smuggling routes emerging from the Orinoco Delta and feeding criminal networks linked to the regime itself. However, the real context was far deeper. It was the largest challenge to U.S. strategic dominance in the Caribbean since the end of the Cold War. The deployment of the USS Gerald R strike group was a firm, explicit, calculated assertion of Washington's influence in the region. With its roughly 90 aircraft, its Ticonderoga-class cruisers, its Arleigh Burke destroyers, and more than 6,000 sailors, the strike group represented a level of deterrence so overwhelming that it altered the military balance of the entire hemisphere. For Maduro, facing growing internal unrest, an imploding economy, and increasingly aggressive rhetoric over the Essequibo region, the appearance of the Ford was the perfect excuse to declare a national emergency and order a massive military mobilization. The political purpose was clear: reinforce internal power by stirring nationalist sentiment and constructing the narrative of an imminent foreign threat. But the risk was enormous. A single hostile radar lock, a single mistaken kinetic action, could have triggered a U.S. response capable of dramatically reshaping the fate of the regime. Not only did it open the possibility of immediate government collapse, but also a scenario where Russian and Chinese advisors, deeply embedded in Venezuelan facilities, might be forced to either react or withdraw abruptly. The presence of the world's most advanced carrier wasn't simply a warning. It was a preemptive chess move. A strategic check that forced the Venezuelan regime to choose between backing down or facing an asymmetric confrontation impossible to win. Here, the inevitable question arises. What is the real value of mobilizing 200,000 soldiers when confronting a 100,000-ton warship equipped with a perfect digital kill chain? To understand this imbalance, one must examine the adversary, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces, the FANB. An institution shaped by political loyalties rather than professional training. Most of its capabilities rely on Russian and Chinese equipment purchased during periods of high oil revenue. Among its most modern assets are a handful of Su-30M K2 fighters, S-300VM air defense systems, dangerous if fully operational, though they rarely are, and various Norinco armored vehicles, many outdated and poorly maintained. Maduro's strategy was symbolic above all else, trying to convince the world that sheer human numbers could deter a U.S. intervention. It's a tactic pulled straight from mid-20th century playbooks, believing that thousands of poorly equipped soldiers can create political hesitation in Washington. But the true threat to the US Navy didn't come from the visible masses. It came from hidden systems, small Russian electronic intelligence units, and Chinese equipment capable of intercepting and transmitting sensitive data in real time to analysis centers in Moscow or Beijing. Their objective was threefold: monitor the Ford, provoke a minor incident to generate diplomatic pressure, turn any US withdrawal into a propaganda victory. The problem was that they were basing everything on a completely wrong assumption, believing that an aircraft carrier like the Gerald R. Ford is simply a huge, visible target. The reality is that its invisible architecture, its integrated network of sensors, radars, and intelligence nodes turns it into a predator that sees, interprets, and acts long before any opponent can. The strike group's preparations were not about being ready to fight. They were about achieving absolute dominance of the battle space. The Ford, lead ship of its class, incorporates more than 20 revolutionary technologies. Among the most notable are the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, EMALS, and the Advanced Arresting Gear, AAG. Together, they allow more launches and recoveries per hour, meaning more aircraft airborne, more surveillance time, and more strike options. But warfare begins much higher, 1,000 miles above. A KH-11 spy satellite transmits exact coordinates of every Venezuelan radar and command center. That information reaches the E-2D Hawkeye patrolling over the Caribbean almost in real time. Its AESA radar generates a complete digital map capable of detecting cruise missiles, low-altitude aircraft, and even suspicious maritime movements. Inside the Ford's command center, thousands of data points per second merge into a unified operational picture where every signal, antenna, and electromagnetic emission is cataloged. The FA-18EF aircraft flying overhead receive constant updates via Link 16, a tactical network that allows a pilot to see the same information detected by a destroyer hundreds of miles away. Aegis destroyers like the USS Thomas Hudner enhance this even more. Its SPY-6 radar can track objects the size of a golf ball across vast distances. From the US perspective, the Venezuelan coast stopped being chaotic terrain and became a grid where every threat had a name, a coordinate, and a priority. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan command relied on outdated systems requiring multiple manual checks and minimally trained personnel. In an environment where each second matters, that operational gap guaranteed defeat even before the first missile was fired. At 08:15 in the morning, two Venezuelan Su-30s attempted an intimidation maneuver, a low-altitude run toward the Ford, trying to provoke a defensive reaction. For a few seconds, their fire control radars illuminated the USS Thomas Hudner in a hostile lock, an act that alone justified a military response. The US reaction was instantaneous, 1.2 seconds from detecting the lock to the Aegis system calculating multiple intercept solutions. At that same moment, the E-2D detected something more serious: the activation of a Victor M electronic intelligence antenna deep inside Venezuelan territory. This wasn't an attack, but a desperate attempt to capture the Ford's electronic signatures, an asset of immense value to Russia. At 08:18, without external confirmation, the carrier launched 4 Super Hornets. They weren't targeting the Su-30s. Their mission was to destroy the Russian-Venezuelan intelligence node located more than 250 miles inland. At 08:24, 2 AGM-154C glide bombs descended silently and shifted into infrared guidance before striking with surgical precision. The antenna, its power supply, and digital systems were reduced to charred debris without Venezuelan operators even detecting the attack. In command centers, screens went dark and electronic links collapsed, leaving Russian intelligence in Venezuela practically blind. At Fuerte Tiuna, where thousands of mobilized troops were gathering, initial fervor turned into confusion. A single strike had penetrated hundreds of kilometers without resistance. The economic blow was also severe. 2 bombs worth $1 million destroyed a system valued at more than $50 million. In less than 90 minutes, deployment orders were quietly suspended, and several units received instructions to stand down. State television tried to offer excuses, but Moscow and Beijing knew the truth. The Ford didn't need to strike bases or troops. With one single blow, it proved that modern warfare is defined by sensors, satellites, and information speed. not by how many soldiers stand on the ground.